Okay, this is a video that I put together from my podcast of just some trailer park stories. You're going to be watching it and you're going to think, well, that story didn't really have a point. And most of them don't. These are stories that are just stuff that happened while I was living in the trailer park, growing up. And I tried them for stand-up. They never really had good jokes at the end. So I just thought, hey, let's just tell these. And then I'll put them on YouTube and people can watch them. It's free, so it's going to be a great time. Just enjoy it. But before I get into it, go ahead and like the video, even though you haven't watched it. Just like it. And then at the end, if you're really like, oh, I didn't like that, then you can unlike it. But don't give it a thumbs down, though. And comment. Tell me some of your poor stories or rich stories, frankly. Whatever kind of story you want to tell. And then share it with a friend if you want. Or you don't have to do that. So here they are.
This is the early 80s, probably 84, 85. And we moved there. And so I grew up, in this trailer park. And at the ends of a trailer, a lot of times, is the hitch that's still left. The metal hitch is coming off the trailer. And we had a little flower bed around it. But it had this little slot where you could, I don't know what the slot was for, but we had a lot of sand in the yard. Our front yard was all sand. We could almost never get grass to grow there. There was grass everywhere else in the trailer park, but our front yard was mostly sand. And we tried to grow grass at various times, but it never really worked out. And you could, in this slot, as a kid, I remember we could pour sand through the slot on the hitch. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense unless you've lived in a trailer or grew up around one. You may know what this is. And then it would have a little crank on the top, and we would go out there and pretend like we were making coffee. We would pretend like we worked at a coffee shop. We were way ahead of our time, I guess. I guess my mom used to grind the coffee when she would go to the grocery store, because back in the day, I think you could do that all the time. Now it just seems like you only do it at Trader Joe's. But back in the day, I guess you could do it all the time. I remember doing it at whatever grocery store we had. Piggly Wiggly, Winn-Dixie, I don't know. I don't remember what was all around back then. Kroger was probably around. And me and my friend, Nikki was my next door neighbor. Nikki's parents used to babysit me. They used to babysit me and some other friends that I knew named Dodie and Brian. But we all got babysit together. And me and Nikki were friends. And I remember one day, and I'm not going to say her last name. To be honest, I don't even remember her last name. But her parents always had this tray under the couch, and they would take the tray out, and they would roll their own cigarettes. And maybe, as a kid, I guess everybody was smoking back in the 80s, so it didn't really matter. And they could have been rolling their own cigarettes. They very well could have. Or it could have been weed, and I just didn't know what weed was back in those days. Either way, it doesn't matter. I like to think it was weed. It makes the trailer park and my childhood seem cooler if it was weed.
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
If it were cigarettes, it just means they were broke. They were broke anyway. But if you're living in a trailer and rolling your own cigarettes, you're struggling. So that was my next door trailer in the trailer park. And I remember, we were out there, me and Nikki one day were out there grinding some coffee beans, just hanging out. And then Nikki squats down. She's standing up. She squats down and through her pants just pees. I mean, we're little kids, 5, 6. And she just pees. I see the pee coming through her pants. And then she goes, hold on a minute, and then runs inside and changes clothes and comes back out. And I just remember thinking, man, you got that all wrong, Nikki. Had you just ran inside, you wouldn't have had to change clothes. And there was another time that we were trying to grow grass in that sand. The sand was great when me and my friends, were little kids, real little kids. Like I used to play with, there was a guy named James. James was my best friend forever in the trailer park. And then there was Brandon and Greg, and the four of us were friends for a long time. I have a great picture of a Polaroid. I've shared that on my Instagram in the past, but I have a great picture that I love of the four of us and Brandon and Greg's granddad. And the four of us used to just play all the time. We would play G.I. Joes. I had every G.I. Joe. I remember buying a Sergeant Slaughter tank from Greg for $10 with a roll of quarters. And we used to we would fight all the time too. We used to just play all the time. So in our yard was all sand. And when I was growing up, that's when the Desert Storm war was going on. So, I had all these tanks and airplanes that were Desert Storm toys. So it was perfect. Our sand-filled yard, we would build little bunkers all over the place. We could build roads all over it. It was great. But as I got a little older and moved out of the toys, we started trying to grow grass in there. So one time, James's nephew, his name was Ricky, and he was a little kid. And Ricky, I hope Ricky has really turned out well, but Ricky was not that bright of a kid. And one time, we were trying to grow grass, so we had the grass roped off so people wouldn't walk in it because we were really trying to get that grass going. And my brother-in-law, he was standing out on the front porch, and he saw Ricky coming up, and he goes, "Ricky, don't walk on the grass. Don't walk on the grass." And then Ricky goes, "But I can hop." And then he starts hopping all the way across the yard. And, that was James's nephew. And then James had another nephew who was my age. James was 1 year older than me. And then he had a nephew that was my age named Kenneth. And Kenneth, I know, was a listener of the podcast, and we're still friends. I'm still friends with all of these guys, actually. I was just texting with Greg the other day. But Kenneth was very stocky, and he was a very muscular kid. He really roughed us all up. Anytime, it was like all less fun. All sports were less fun with Kenneth because Kenneth was bigger and stronger than everyone. And he had a stepbrother named Luke who was also bigger and stronger than everyone. He had a stepsister named Amanda too. She was bigger than us too, but she was just older mainly. And, they would just rough us all up. But me and Kenneth were friends. And I remember I got some boxing gloves for Christmas. My mom bought me 2 sets of boxing gloves. And I didn't know anything about boxing gloves. I'm sure she didn't know anything about boxing gloves. And me and James used to put them on because we were the same size. We'd box each other around. That was a lot of fun. But I tried it one time with Kenneth. And Kenneth punched me like a right hook in the jaw. And I don't think my jaw's been the same since. It was very sore. He probably knocked it out of socket. And it's not been the same ever since. And so that was a lot of fun. And me and James, we grew up together, and we just used to play all the time. And there was this girls named Mandy and Becky that lived at the end of the street. Now, Mandy and Becky, I don't know where they're at. I have no idea. But they were always a bit of a hefty crew. And then there was another girl named Mandy who was their friend, and she was always over. And apparently Mandy had a lot of stepsisters. And so when Mandy and Becky and the other Mandy were together, and then all the stepsisters were around, they were like a gang. It was like a gang of women bullying us around. I remember they tore down my clubhouse one time. My dad used to come pick me up every other Sunday and take me out to lunch, either to a Western Sizzlin', Captain D's, those are a Shoney's. Those were our main spots. Western Sizzlin', Captain D's, or a Shoney's. I remember hitting those up quite a bit. And then he would take me to Walmart. We would walk around for a while, and he'd buy me a G.I. Joe, and then I'd go home. Well, me and James had built this great clubhouse, and I wanted to show my dad. So one day he drops me off at the house, and I take him in the backyard to show me the clubhouse, and it's torn completely down. Not one board, not one plank is standing. That thing is tore completely down. And I find out that it's Mandy and Becky and Mandy and the stepsisters. This gang of women abusing us. So they're all on their bikes one day, and me and James are pissed. And the driveway in the trailer park was kind of a dirt road, but also a gravel road. So there'd be a lot of that little gravel. And we go out and we start throwing rocks at these girls. because we're pissed. I mean, we had a good clubhouse built. We spent a lot of time on it, and now we're pissed. So we're throwing rocks at them. We're hitting them, you know, but they're taking it. They're all tough. They're taking it. And then James throws a rock, and it misses. We're standing on either side of the girls. James throws a rock. It misses all the girls and hits me in the side of the head. And I'm bleeding. I go inside. I'm crying. I'm bleeding. James says one of the girls threw it, but we all knew it wasn't true. I don't think he was trying to lie. Well, he was trying to lie. He just didn't want to get in trouble. We used to throw rocks all the time. I remember this kid, Josh. Josh used to come over. I'm still friends with his family. I haven't talked to Josh in a long time, but he was a wild kid. My sister used to babysit him and his brother and sister. And Josh was over one time, and I don't know what happened, but we got into a fight, and I started throwing rocks at him. I was hitting him in the chest. I was throwing small rocks, but I was hitting him in the chest. We didn't play around. When we got into fights back in the day, we were fighting. And then I remember Josh had long fingernails, and he scratched my face. He scratched me from the forehead down to the cheek. And then later, I got scratched by a hunting dog. My dad had all these hunting dogs in a pen, and we would have to go down and feed them. And you have to go into the pen to feed them. There's so many dogs, and they jumped. I remember one dog scratched me from the below my eye down through my cheek. I got clawed up. But we used to throw rocks all the time. I remember James, one time, there used to be an old garage in the trailer park. And it will be open sometimes, sometimes not, but they'd just be working on cars. And it was right next to James's trailer. And one day we were just out there, and he was like, "You want to throw some rocks at this car?" And I was like, "Yeah." So James throws the first rock, and it breaks a window, and then we take off running. And we used to throw rock. We used to have a slingshot. We would slingshot rocks at glass bottles. And, I mean, we used to, after I got a little older, all those G.I. Joes that my dad had bought me over the years, all the G.I. Joes my mom bought me over the years, I'm pretty sure I shot them all with a BB gun. We didn't shoot each other because, as I've said before, I've been shot by a BB gun when I was 5 years old. So I refused to shoot BB guns at each other until I got to a drinking age. And then once I started drinking, I was shooting people with BB guns. When I was a little kid, I grew up, I had divorced parents, and my dad lived on a farm, and my mom moved to this trailer park near where she used to work. And she used to work at a place called Ampex. And Ampex made VHS tapes. They made the tape inside for VHS tapes. I think they might have been the only place in the country that did this at the time. My mom worked there for years with many other people. It was factory work. She worked third shift. But they all, she was telling me not too long ago, they all thought that they would retire from there. They thought this was their job for life. They were all going to do this and retire from there. And it was really a shock and disappointment that that place closed down. And, they got to be still making tapes somewhere because you can still find them for sale. She was working there when she got divorced from my dad, and this trailer park was close to where she worked. She made good money, but she had me and my two older sisters, and me and my older sisters have a different dad than me. So she had a lot going on. So she moved to a 2-bedroom, 1-bath trailer with me and my two sisters. And then, so as time goes on, as I get a little older, I'm probably in elementary school. Nikki's family has moved out, and now my sister and her husband and her stepkids, they move into that trailer that Nikki's family used to live in. So for a while, we had a thing going where it was me and my mom and one sister and her boyfriend, and then my other sister, her husband, and their kids in the trailer, and then we had all the space in between. So we had like our own little courtyard right there in the trailer park. And then we had a shed in the middle. For a while, we had a big pile of dirt. My brother-in-law drove a dump truck on and off, and so if we needed some dirt, he'd just come by, drop it off. I remember we had a bunch of wood out there at one point. I mean, we had it all. Anything you need, we had. We had a shed that my brother-in-law had a bunch of like Playboys out there in the shed. It's a lot of fun. And my mom worked third shift at Ampex, Ampex later was Quantigy, but she worked third shift, so she would leave every night about 10:30 and come home about 7, something like that. And so I would always try to be asleep before she left in hopes that I would just sleep through the whole night and not have to be afraid. Because, it's probably too old to be afraid, but also I get freaked out by stuff. I don't think the nighttime is natural. I think we're supposed to go to sleep when the sun goes down. I think we're supposed to wake up at sunrise. People are like, oh, you're afraid of the dark. We're all afraid of the dark, unless you're a psychopath, right? I'm not afraid of the dark, but the nighttime, it gets eerie out there, especially when you're a little kid sleeping alone in a trailer park. So one night, and I don't know if you remember the collect calls that you used to get, you would say, you would answer the phone and you'd say, this is AT&T with a collect call from, and then you leave your voicemail. So it'd be like, if I'm calling my mom, it'd be like, she answers and it goes, this is AT&T with a collect call from Dusty, your son, something like that. But this guy, I guess, was prank calling me. And so I pick up the phone and it says, you have an AT&T collect call from, I know where you live, you're dead. And I freaked out, right? I freaked out. I jumped up in my underwear and I ran to my sister's house and started banging on the door. And I told them what happened. They let me in and I slept there. And then the next day we called the police and we tried to make a report on this because they had left a voicemail. But this is where you had one of those call-in voicemails. So, with the collect call and the answer, so the answer machine would pick up, and when it picked up, that's when the collect call thing started. So it'd be like, you've reached Edna's house. And as it starts Edna's house, it would say, you have an AT&T collect call. So that would go. So by the time the beep comes, we're way into the message. So it hits beep, and all I hear is your titties. And then it hangs up. Right? So I don't know what's going on. I guess the guy looked in the phone book, saw that it was a woman, and just started prank calling. Or it was an ex-boyfriend that was real mad at her. I don't know. But the cops couldn't do anything about it. So I stayed at my sister's house for a while. And prior to that, I think prior to this incident, I had been staying with an old couple, Mr. and Mrs. Eason. I think I've talked about this before, but it's been a while. I was staying with Mr. and Mrs. Eason. They were the nicest couple. They could not have been nicer. And I would sleep on their couch, while my mom was at work. And then I'd, go to school the next day. But I don't know if this happened or if I dreamed it. But one night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I looked up and I saw Mr. Eason going in. He was in the kitchen and he was just getting something out of the cabinet. Very reasonable. Makes total sense. It's his house. He could have been thirsty. But then I look at the nightstand and there's Miss Eason sitting with her arm propped and her head on her arm, as propped on a table, her head on her hand, just looking at me sleep. Now, she was a sweet old lady, so there's a chance she just was like, oh, look at him sleeping. He's just a cutie, and maybe she did it for 30 seconds, and I happened to see her during that time. But I woke up, saw Mr. Eason and then Miss Eason just staring at me, and I said, I am not staying there anymore with those creeps. Now, my mom and us, we all was friends with them for a long time. But I was like, what a creep.
All right, so that was them. And like I say, no real point to a lot of them, but very fun, a lot of fun. And if you want to hear more stuff like this, listen to my podcast. It's called the We're Having a Good Time podcast. It's on iTunes, Spotify, and other stuff too. And then I'll post clips here on YouTube. So be sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and you can share the video if you want. But do give it a thumbs up so that more people see it, and comment on it. Tell me some of your trailer park stories or fun, poor stories as a kid.